Hey everyone, welcome to Plants and Politics. So, a little bit of an update in the Epstein case. A woman named Courtney Wild is one of Epstein's many victims who's been seeking justice for her abuse for many, many years. She filed a lawsuit more than a decade ago against Epstein and the government, and she's literally been fighting ever since. She alleges that the government violated the Crime Victims' Rights Act when they handed Epstein that ridiculous plea deal, basically done in secret and failing to notify the victims in advance, which is something they're supposed to do under the law. In early 2019, a judge ruled in her favor, but unfortunately, before the judge could make a final determination about whether or not Epstein's deal should or could be tossed out of court and reconsidered, he was arrested and then subsequently died. So her case was dismissed. She then refiled, and now her case is expected to be heard before the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals on December 3rd. So after the release of the Department of Justice report last week, which I reported on to you guys, her attorney, Paul Cassell, filed a new request with the court. In the new filing, he asked the court to consider all of this new information and evidence from that nearly 300-page DOJ report that was released last week. So Cassell claims that he and his client were lied to when the DOJ told them that they had reviewed and had in their possession all the evidence and documents related to Epstein's deal. And he also says that some of the emails that he found in that DOJ report were never given to him or his client as part of the discovery process. So that's standard protocol. They're supposed to turn everything over. Ms. Wild's legal team highlighted this fact in the newly filed court document, writing, quote, "In just a few minutes' time, I identified several external emails that appear to have been available to OPR, but inexplicably never made available to Ms. Wild." So OPR, in case you haven't listened to my report from last week, that is the Office of Professional Responsibility. It's a division of the Justice Department, and they are the ones that are supposed to be independent and do these independent reviews. So they did their almost 2-year research and investigation and came to the ridiculous conclusion that the prosecutors did nothing wrong in giving this decades-long pedophile a slap on the wrist and a 13 or 14-month work release sentence. So after they reviewed these documents, they found all this other stuff that wasn't handed over to them. And among the emails that never made it over to Cassell or the others on Ms. Wild's legal team was correspondence between the federal prosecutor and one of Epstein's attorneys. And in that correspondence, there's emails showing that Epstein's lawyer argued against Epstein having to register as a sex offender. Now, that's something that he didn't end up having to do. Even though he had violated dozens, possibly hundreds of children, because of that agreement, he was not made to register as a sex offender. And there were also emails exchanged regarding a government subpoena to obtain computers that had been at Epstein's home in Florida. So somehow these computers were removed from Epstein's property prior to the execution of a search warrant by police. So prosecutors, of course, wanted to get their hands on the computers, and they were going to issue a subpoena. Well, Epstein's attorneys fought the subpoena and won. So as a condition, another condition of Epstein's reprehensible plea deal, prosecutors agreed to withdraw the subpoena. What the hell did prosecutors actually get? What was his punishment? There's absolutely none. It's not like they said, oh, okay, we'll withdraw the subpoena for the computers, but your guy has to agree to 5 years in prison or 10 years in prison or something, or a lifetime on the list for sexual predators. They got nothing. They just laid down and gave him everything. So one of Ms. Wild's attorneys had this to say in regard to these newly surfaced emails, quote, "So far as we can determine in our records, this correspondence has not been produced to us. This correspondence is significant because had the efforts to obtain the computer continued, it is likely that the prosecutors would have obtained ironclad forensic evidence to charge Epstein with child pornography crimes." This is unfreaking real. How they just let him completely walk. Who doesn't gather evidence? Who doesn't go in and get evidence before you agree to make a deal with the accused? This is absolutely absurd and insane. So Cassell also took issue with the fact that the Department of Justice never informed him about the emails that disappeared from the server of the prosecutor, Alex Acosta, who gave Epstein that slap on the wrist deal. So as I reported last week, 1 full year of emails somehow vanished from Alex Acosta's server. And they just so happened to cover the period of time in which he was negotiating with Epstein's attorneys and when they were pressuring him to end the investigation. So in regard to these missing emails, Cassell said, quote, "The gap seems to have surgically struck on exactly the time period when most of the big decisions were being made. I was stunned because you would think if there was ever a case where the Justice Department would have been very careful to make sure they had complete records and things weren't missing, this would be the one." Now, unfortunately, as of yesterday, the 11th Circuit Court denied their request, the request made by Wild's legal team, and refused to admit the DOJ report and all this newly found information into the record for her case and for her upcoming trial. However, the reason that they gave was that Ms. Wild's case hinges on only 2 issues. One, which is whether the Victims' Rights Act applies before charges are filed against a defendant. And number 2, if so, whether violations of that act can be enforced with an independent court action. So Wild's attorney, Paul Cassell, was actually happy with the ruling. He said, quote, "We're actually pleased that today's ruling narrows the case down to 2 issues because we think those are 2 issues where the statute and the legislative history make it absolutely clear that the victim should prevail in this case." So he seems pretty hopeful that they will win. I mean, it seems like that is the case, given that a judge already ruled in her favor on this matter. I can't imagine that another court would rule against her unless this really is all completely and totally rigged. What Wild and her attorneys ultimately hope to achieve is the ability to take legal action against Epstein's co-conspirators, because unfortunately, with this bogus joke of a non-prosecution agreement deal that Epstein was given, it also provided immunity to his co-conspirators. And it was very broad. That's the major issue, is that the language in that deal is so broad that it could apply to any co-conspirator, meaning that all these lawsuits against Ghislaine Maxwell could be thrown out. She could claim, oh, I'm one of his co-conspirators, and it said in that agreement that you can't prosecute or investigate or take issue with any of his co-conspirators, so that applies to me. You guys are SOL. So this is a very important case, and of course, I will let you guys know as soon as I hear anything. It's one thing that Epstein got to die without paying for his crimes, but for all of these other people to get away with it too, it would just be obscene. It would just be the biggest travesty of justice ever. And they're going to keep doing it. And that's as big, if not bigger, of an issue, because they'll see they're above the law. There's nothing that can be done. And so they can just keep going. They can just keep doing what they've done and victimizing other children. Keep every body part crossed, guys. I will let you know what happens. As always, like, share, subscribe. I will talk to you soon. Take care. Thanks for listening to Plants and Politics. The only way we can take our country and power back is to spread the truth and build an army. So remember to like, follow, subscribe, and share on Facebook, YouTube, and wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks again.